This presentation is all about pinching. It's one method of clay to make really quick, fast forms. You can pinch to make pinch pots, and the pinch pot on its own can be a very beautiful form, but you can also pinch to make pinch pots that end up coming together to make a solid form. You may not know this yet, but when you see a ceramic sculpture about this big, or even this big, or even this big, you need to know that that is actually a hollow form. It is not a solid form, whether it appears that way or not. So taking two pinch pots and putting them together to make one hollow form is a great way to kind of get that sculpture going. So this presentation is going to happen in three parts. We're going to make the pinch pots first, then we're going to put the two pots together, and then we're going to beat them into your desired shape. If you are only planning on doing pinch pots, you will only need clay and your hands. But if you plan on making a hollow form out of two pinched pots, you're going to need the following tools. You're going to need your bag of clay. You're going to need some slip with a paintbrush, cut-off wire, wooden modeling tool, fettling knife, scoring tool, sponge, clay shredder, serrated rib, metal rib, rubber rib. The softer, the better. And we will talk about how you're going to use each of these tools as we move through the demonstration. Here we go. So first things first, we are going to take our cutoff wire and we are going to cut, let's say a baseball size. If you're making something like shakers, or if you're making something more along the lines of a sculpture, you may want to go ahead and cut grapefruit sized shapes. What is important is that your shapes are actually the same size, because what we're trying to do here is make two pinch pots that can fit together like that. Ooh, challenge accepted. Now, if you're pulling your clay directly from the bag, it is not always necessary to wedge your clay. You can just slap it into a ball. That being said, it's always preferable that you do a few quick wedges, even if the clay is already de-aired, so that it's actually a little bit more workable. I actually had to go and wedge my clay real quick because coming out of the bag, my clay is really stiff. And now that I've wedged it a little bit, it's loosened up and I'm gonna have an easier time pinching. Pinching takes a lot of effort with your fingers, so if your clay is really hard, you're definitely gonna wanna loosen that up, and hopefully it's just a little bit hard because it hasn't been wedged. Again, if your clay is getting too dry, you're gonna need to see that hydration tips video so that you know how to get it back to being a little bit wetter. You're going to need nice plastic wetter clay. Okay, so now I have my wedged ball of clay and I am going to put it into a ball. I want it in a ball. And to get started, I'm going to use my dominant hand as a table, let's say. So my dominant hand is a table that's going to hold the ball. My other hand, I'm going to take that thumb and I'm going to put it all the way to the bottom. I don't want to push through. However, if I do accidentally push through, there is a way to fix that, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So if you pushed all the way through, don't worry, you do not have to start over again. We will fix it. Unless it's really drastic, then sometimes it's just easier to start over again. But for now, just try to feel your way to the bottom before you actually start doing any pinching, okay? And I also want to mention now that in this class, we try to get our walls to be 1/4 of an inch all the way around with everything that we do. So you're going to hear me say that a lot. For now, I know it's hard to feel that, but it is important that you are far enough down that you don't have this much clay, or like 1 inch of clay at the bottom. If you do that, you're going to create uneven walls and you're going to create a really heavy bottom, and you don't want uneven walls. The drying, it messes with the drying, and we try really hard to make everything 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that you can actually see what I'm doing here. So I have my ball of clay. Notice that my thumb is perpendicular to the, I guess maybe it's parallel. My thumb is parallel to the table. And I'm going to leave it like that. I do not want to do this. If I start pinching with my hand like this, I'm going to end up creating a bowl that goes way out like this. And what I'm trying to do is have a form that's more like that. So we don't want to make a plate, is what I like to say. So your hand is going to be, your thumb is going to be parallel to your hand. And at the bottom, you are going to start pinching. Just at the bottom. Do not go up your wall. You're going to pinch down at the bottom all the way around. The way that I'm pinching, I am taking my thumb and my fingers and I'm just going like that. Really, the pressure is happening between 2 points. I'm really not using my full fingers, because if I do that, I'm not controlling my wall. I'm not able to feel the thickness of my wall. So I'm going to go in there, I'm going to pinch more like this. Even though from the outside, it doesn't really look too much like that. I'm going to continue to pinch around and around just at the bottom until my walls feel even and until they feel like they're about 1/4 of an inch. Again, that's awfully hard to judge. In the classroom, I pass this around and I let you feel what that feels like. In this situation, though, obviously we can't. That being said, if you ever do want to try to figure out just how thick your walls are, you can take a needle tool and you can press the needle tool in. See if you can see this a little better. You can press the needle tool in to where it hits your thumb, and then you can push your finger to where your finger hits the clay. And then when you pull the needle tool out, you can actually see how thick your walls are. So my walls right now are, let's see, maybe 3/8 of an inch thick. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to keep going around there until I feel like my walls are thin enough. Now, it's important that you do not start pinching up this way until you have completely did what you need to do down here at the bottom. Because once your walls start to grow, it's going to be harder to get in at the bottom. So be careful about how you're doing that. And if you see in here, it's kind of like a donut. So I have this a big puffy area right here that's full of clay, and inside it's actually my walls get really thin. Okay, so I'm gonna, now that my bottom is looking pretty darn good, I'm gonna go ahead and move up just to the next ring of clay. If my thumb is only this long, then that's all that I am pinching. So that would be my next ring, I guess you would say. And I'm going to keep going around until that feels nice and thin and that feels even. Another really important thing when you are pinching is that you're doing it really methodically. So I'm going to try to do this to where you can just see one finger. You pinch and then move just a tiny bit and pinch. Pinch, move just a tiny bit, pinch. So it's you are pinching every thumb width of the wall. Every thumb width of the wall. What you are not doing is this. Because when you do this, you are going to thin some areas out and leave other areas thick. So then you're not controlling your wall and you're not controlling your form. So again, it's real important that you are pinching every inch of that wall, and probably using that thumb is a good indicator of when to move to the next area. At any time you can switch hands if your hands start to get tired. So I'm going to go ahead and move up another rung or another ring, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pinch. Okay. All right. Notice a few things here. I still have my donut at the top. It's a little bit thinner through here, and then it gets pretty wide here. My form is still going up like this. You've got to keep it like that. If it starts to plate out, you're going to get in trouble. So if it starts to do something like this, you've got trouble. If we're going to fix this, but I just want you to see the difference between what yours should look like and what you do not want yours to look like. You are going to keep pinching until you get to the rim. Once you get to the rim, you are not going to pinch off the rim. Do you see what I just did there? I made it really thin. Don't do that. You need to have a nice 1/4 of an inch left of your rim so that when you go to put your two pots together, you have surface area to actually put them together. So you're just going to pinch up to that rim, but you're not going to pinch off of the rim. The other thing that's important to notice right now too is, again, we've got our form that's going like this. Make sure that your form is not, that you didn't pinch it to where it's going in like this. Do you see how that's turning in? If your work turns in, the pressure of that next pot coming in when we go to press it down, it's going to actually push that whole side in. So it's really important that your form goes out a little bit like this, or that it's kind of straight. It's following this wall straight up. If you have a really uneven rim, if your rim is really uneven, at this point, don't worry about it. It's really okay. We're gonna shave that down and make that ready for next time. So here is one of your pinch pots. How nice is that? Now the challenge is going to be that your next pinch pot actually mirrors this one. When you are finished with your pinch pot, you are not going to just slap it on the table, because you just flattened your bottom. And this is, of course, for if we're going to put the two together, which is what I'm doing. If you're just making a pinch pot, this is beautiful. You can go ahead, let it firm up, and then you can actually beat it into shape. But for us, for making an actual hollow form, well, we do not want a flat bottom. We want to control that bottom when the time comes. So for when you're finished with your pinch pot, you're going to go ahead and you're going to set it on its rim. And you are going to set it outside of the plastic because you actually want to let these firm up. They need to firm up. If you do not allow them to firm up and you go to press them together, they're going to completely collapse. So you don't want that. I wanted to talk about a few problems that you may run into while you're pinching and how to fix them. So the first problem is if you've got cracks, it's because it's too dry. You probably either over wedged or you took too long to pinch up and the clay lost a lot of its water. If this happens to this degree, you probably need to start over with a fresher piece of clay. This is never really good. So these cracks are really not okay, but little surface cracking that you might see, it does indicate that your clay is starting to dry, but if they're just on the surface, they're very superficial, you're okay. We're going to be able to get rid of those when we go to clean things up. It's the ones that are going all the way through that you have to worry about. Not good. If you are pinching, this usually happens more toward the beginning, but if you're pinching and you happen to go through your work, it's fixable. So don't start over, especially if you've already got a form. Don't start over, just grab some clay and we are going to fix this. So I'm going to take the clay and I'm going to make a plug. I probably didn't have to get one that's quite this big, but I'm going to make a plug and I'm going to actually probably pull off whatever I need to pull there, and I'm actually going to plug this up. So I can just take that in there. Because the clay is wet, you do not need to do what we call slip and score. The clay is wet, we can go ahead and we can just smush that in, and we are going to make sure that everything is really nice and smeared, because that's what's going to essentially give us our seal. Out here, if you want to pull some of this off, because I didn't need all that, but I do want to leave some on there, and then I can just pull this over as well. And now it is like it never happened. The other thing that may happen is you have plated out. I don't know if that's a real term or not, that's just the term I usually use, but your form is supposed to look like this, and you ended up with a form that looks like this. So if this happened, you can get it back to an extent. Let's see how well we can do with this. I'm not real sure if this is going to get us to where we need it to go. This technique is also going to help get it to a form that fits. So these two forms fit pretty well. I don't really need to adjust these forms at all, but if your form is a little off, let's see, these are still too good too. I don't even know how that happened. If your forms are this far off, you're probably not, it's probably not going to work. But if your forms are just a little off, you can use this technique to pull them together. Okay? So I'm going to turn this from a really open-mouthed bowl to something a little bit more closed. I'm going to do that by ripping these apart and overlapping. I'm going to do that in probably 4 places. Sometimes that depends on how much you need to come in. How far down you rip is also going to determine how far you need to come in. So you can see I've kind of created this pinwheel here with these rips. Now again, because the clay is wet, you do not need to worry about slipping and scoring. But what you do need to make sure that you do is really smear these together. At this point, you are not pinching. You are only pulling the clay. So be real careful that you're not actually pinching the clay. If you pinch, you may thin it out in that area, and you don't want to do that. So you're going to go around and you are going to smear the inside and the outside. And you're going to make sure you do that to all 4 or 5 or however many you did. And now we have a shape that is a little more closed. Do you see these? Do you see how this is happening here? That is okay. We are going to beat these, so we're not too concerned about what this shape is at this point. And now, oh, not bad. Not bad at all. So that was really far away before, and now we're looking pretty good here. So that is one way to pull your rim back in and to actually fit with whatever you have. Now, if you are in a situation where you've got one side that's pretty thick still, you can come in and just kind of stretch. I'm just kind of pulling this. I'm doing multiple rounds. I'm not just yanking it, right? I'm actually going to go in here and I can just kind of circle this around, and I'm pinching a little bit. There's a little bit of pressure, and I'm pulling it out a little bit, and that's going to widen this. So if you need to widen, you're just going to rotate and pinch a little and pull to get it to open. If you need it to close in, you are going to rip and put those, rip and fold, can't think of the right word, rip and fold those back together. So now that you know how to fix holes, you know what cracks are good and what cracks are not good, and you know how to actually fit your two pieces together, you are going to set them on the rim, and you are going to completely leave them alone until they're firm. This is another instance where a video isn't as good as in person, because when I say leather hard, you don't really know what that means yet. So what is leather hard? Leather hard is when your form doesn't move at all when you try to wobble it. But you can see that the clay is still, this is not leather hard, that the clay is still the same color, so it still has its water in it, but it's very firm. This is when we like to work with clay. Anytime we're putting two pieces of clay together, for the most part, we want our parts to be leather hard. There are exceptions, of course, but for the most part, we want them to be leather hard. So if you can push this and it doesn't feel like anything's going to collapse, you are pretty good to go. If it's still movable, you are not good to go. So if you can still move it around, it is too wet. And again, when you go to press the pieces together, it is just going to collapse right in. So you do not want that. If you let them sit out, they're going to leather up quicker than if you put them under plastic. You can see another video where we talk about stuff like that. The wrap-up video, go ahead and look at the wrap-up video. When I talk about drying times, and I should probably stop playing with those. I talk about drying times and how to wrap your work right for whatever you're kind of needing to wrap your work for. That's a whole video on its own, if you can believe that. It seems so simple. All right, let's move on to part 2, putting these suckers together. Little sidebar, if you are going to be making maracas, you're going to need to put the clay that's going to make the sound in before you actually connect the two pieces together. As far as that goes, you're going to want to make little balls, and you're probably going to want to make different sizes because the different size balls are going to make different sounds. A smaller one is going to make a high-pitched sound, a larger one is going to make a low-pitched sound. So you could mix them all up and put different sizes in each maraca, or you could decide to make one maraca have a low bassy sound and another one to make a high pitched sound, and you'll put the balls in according to that. You do want to make sure that these are dry before you put them in, so I would make them first before you actually ever do your pinching, or while you're waiting for your 2 pinch pots to firm up, go ahead and make your sound makers, and they will be dry by the time you actually go to put this together. So once you have the balls made, you're just going to put them in there, and then you're going to slip and score and do everything that you've just learned to make this a maraca. And you will not hear it now, but once it is fired, especially once it's taken to its maturity, it's going to sound real nice. My work is firm now, and I am going to go ahead and get them ready to put together. I'm going to do that by trying to find the best fit. So if I've got some weird holes here and there, I'm going to try to kind of match up just where it fits the best. I don't want like a huge gap, so there's probably an area that's a little bit better than that huge gap. Like, that's pretty good. I kind of like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to key my work. So I'm just going to take the needle tool and I'm just going to kind of let myself know where I started, because I'm going to go around now and I'm going to cut or shave this down so that it fits a little bit better. Okay. Now, the fettling knife. I do not usually use this to do little trimming like what I'm about to do. I usually use the clay shredder, which I'll show you in a minute, but the fettling knife can cut in the wrong direction really quickly, so I'm always very careful with this. If you only have a fettling knife, I'm going to talk about how to actually cut correctly. So if I know that I need to cut a high point off, I am going to take the knife and I am not going to saw it back and forth, because when you saw it back and forth, you are going to inadvertently move your wall back and forth, which in the long run could potentially pull away from the seam, because clay has memory and all this fun stuff about clay. The clay is going to remember that you did that, and it's going to shrink back to that. So if you are going to use the fettling knife, you are going to hold your rim at the top with your fingers, and you are going to slice. You're going to move your fingers while you're slicing. Obviously, you don't want to cut your finger off. So again, no seesaw. That is not good. But the better way to do it, or the more gentle way to do it, less scary, is to take your clay shredder and just wherever you have those high points, shred them down. And you can do that to both sides if both sides need it. If you don't need it, if yours is fitting together pretty well, you don't have to go through all this. And then you can form fit again, see how things go. Find your key. Okay, at this point, I'm feeling pretty good about this. So I am going to go ahead and move to the next step. All of these clay bits that are coming out of the clay shredder, save those. They make the best slip. You will need to look at that, the slip demonstration to see how to make slip. But save all those guys, they're wonderful. Okay, there are a few different ways that you can go about connecting your two pinched spheres or pinched pots to make a sphere. I like to put a wet coil in between my pots, because we're going to really be banging on these, and I like that there's something between the two pots. Some people will just slip and score and put them together and then put a reinforcing coil around the outside. I like to have a coil on that inside. So you see that I slipped. It doesn't really matter if you slip or score first. What does matter is that your score marks are really, really deep score marks. It's not enough to come in here and put score marks in like that. See the difference there? Really important. You want this. This is wimpy. You don't want that. The point of scoring is that the wet piece of clay is going to smush into the teeth marks of the scorer. If your teeth marks or those grooves aren't deep enough, the clay will not be able to go in there. So that clay is kind of what marries these together. And it's because it's slipping into those score marks. If there's nothing to slip into, it's just going to be clay that's just sitting there, and it could very, very well pop out. Your pinch pot could literally just break in half, or you could have a seam there. So you want your scores, and then you want your slip. Both sides get slipped and scored. Both tops get slipped and scored. Now, you are going to need a coil. If you do not know how to make a coil yet, you can watch that demonstration for coiling, or just get it into something that is like a coil. And if that means pushing it between your hands like this, go ahead and do that. You basically just need wet clay that's going to sink into those teeth. So if this is how you need to do it, go ahead and do it that way. You can attempt to roll it on the table. Again, this is if you don't know how to coil. If you know how to coil, then you just get right to it. Okay, so if you can get something like this, that's good. It doesn't have to be as beautiful as this one. And then you're going to choose one of the sides to lay the coil down on. Once that coil is down, you're going to press it in to your teeth marks just to make sure that it is nice and secure. And then you are also going to slip and score this. Again, we are going to really be messing with this seam. We're going to put a lot of pressure on this seam, so I'm not messing around. I want to make sure that things are looking good. I'm going to go ahead and put slip on here. Notice I'm not putting a whole bunch of slip on. You never want to do that. It makes your seam weak actually, because you just added a bunch of water into something that's going to be a seam. So make sure that you don't do this. And then you're going to find your key, and you're going to place these back together. I can't find my key. There we go. And then you're going to put these back together. Now, before I do this next step, I do want to talk about the shape that you are wanting to end up with. If you are trying to make a wiener dog, let's say, this is not long enough for a wiener dog, right? This isn't really going to work. So if you know in advance that you're wanting to make a wiener dog, then your individual pinch pots need to be more elongated. Or if you can't really make that work, then you can start adding coils to actually make this longer. I'm faux-ing this right now. This is not how you would do it. You can start adding coils to make this longer. Again, you don't want to do this if you don't know how to coil, because this is not correct. You don't just put coils on like that. But that is one way to elongate that. See the coil demo if you really need to do that and you need to figure out how to make coils. If you do that, you do want to do it before you want those coils to get firmed up like this. So don't do it at this stage. Do it before and let those coils get firmed up as part of your pinched pot. It needs to be leather hard. Okay, lined up my pieces. There's my key right there. And before I just go in and do this, I'm actually going to go around And I'm going to make sure that everything is really nice and lined up. You don't want anything collapsing or caving in. Get this stuff out of the way. So before I do any of that, I'm just pressing in where something isn't working, or if I need something to pop out a little bit, I can take my hands and pinch a little bit. So I'm just kind of pinching like that, and it's popping it out. So I'm either pressing on the sides or I'm pressing down on the top to get this lined up correctly. Okay. And I am looking kind of down from my eye point. I'm looking down so I can actually see all that. Then once it looks like it's lined up, I'm back at my key again. Then I'm going to put a little bit of pressure at my heel, but I'm going to take my fingertips, and that's where I'm going to really start to press in. You see that coil moving? That is what I want. When that coil is moving, I know that it's getting stuck in all of my score marks or my teeth, and I know I'm creating a really good seam there. I'm back at my key again, but I'm going to keep on going, and I'm going to keep going until my coil does not move anymore. Okay. Usually that'll take 2 or 3 times around. So this is looking pretty ugly, don't you think? It's looking pretty ugly. And what I'm about to ask you to do is going to make you crazy. You're going to want to press this coil in. You're going to want to do it. And I am telling you, don't do it. If you press this coil in while it is still wet and your 2 pinch spots are leather hard, what's going to happen is that coil is going to shrink, and you are going to have a permanent divot between your 2 pieces. And it's not going to show up right away. You're not going to see it until your work dries. And then your work is going to dry, and right in the middle of your face, or whatever this is going to be, you're going to have a big divot. You don't want that. So leave that out until it firms up. You want this to be leather hard before you press it in. The other reason you want to wait is that this coil still has shrinking to do, right? These have already shrunk a little bit because as clay dries, it shrinks. So these have already shrunk a little bit. This still needs to shrink. When this shrinks, it's going to pull away a little bit from your 2 pieces. So if that should happen in your seam, you're going to want to press this in while it's leather hard, because that's really going to compact and compress your seam. And that's what you want to do. So you are going to leave this out. You can wrap it in plastic, or if you want to get to it again today, you can let it hang out for a few hours, and then you can go ahead and press it in, which will be the next step that I show you. Don't do it without me first. Something else to say about this. This seam's going to dry faster than these did because this is already dried up a little bit, and it's going to pull the moisture from that wet clay. So put it down, set it aside. Don't look at it because it will make you crazy because it's really ugly right now. Okay, moving on to forming your sphere. We're going to push in the seam, and then we're going to form it to the shape that we want. This is just a quick reminder that you should always be storing your work in plastic. Rarely should you ever just let it hang out unless you need it to firm up within the next hour or 2. Otherwise, make sure that you always have it tucked in plastic, or else it will dry up and you will regret it. Okay, we have this ugly seam here that I told you to leave. I know it hurts, but that's life. Okay, wooden modeling tool is what you're going to want to use to push the seam in. It's going to give you a lot of pressure in that seam. You're going to use the part that is convex, the part that goes like this, kind of like your thumb would. And you're just going to come in here. I always like to start where my key is because then I know how many times I've gone around. You're just going to come in here and you're going to press that seam in, and I'm wiggling around here a little bit. I'm going to continue to press this in for a few rotations. So just like when we put the two parts together, I told you to go around a few times. You're going to go around a few times now too. Still looking ugly, but not as bad as it was looking. At this point, you're going to take the serrated rib, that's the rib with the teeth on it, and you're going to go around that seam. This is actually going to help clean up the seam. It is also going to compress the seam. Again, I'm using that word compression. It's so important that everything you do is taking those clay particles and jamming them together. The more compressed your wall is, the tighter those particles are, the stronger your piece is going to be. When you're using this serrated rib, you're going to be going back and forth. This serrated rib is also going to be used as a cleanup tool, which I would go ahead and clean up this whole thing if I wasn't going to beat it, but since I'm going to beat it into a shape, I'm going to go ahead and hold off on cleaning until I've beat it into the shape I want to beat it in. Okay. Now we are ready to beat this into shape. You're going to take a paddle, or if you don't have a paddle, any type of wood will do. Paddles are the best. You can use your hands, although it's going to take you a little bit longer to do that. I purposely did not wait until for my seam to firm up because I'm hoping it's going to split open. I want to show you how to fix that if it splits open, and I also want to show you what happens if you start beating this before your seam is firm. So hopefully that'll happen. Sometimes I do this and then it doesn't happen. Okay, when you go to beat, you don't have to be nice about it, okay? There is air trapped inside of this form, and that means that as you beat, the air is going to beat back at you, so it will not collapse at this point. So you can go in here and you can really give it a whack. Are you ready? I'm going to go to a little bit of an extreme because I want you to see just how far you can go beating these into a shape. So I'm going to try to make a pyramid here. Right now I kind of have a cone. I'm going to go ahead and give my sides some flatness. So of course my seam hasn't split open yet. I swear, every time. Okay, what I want you to notice, this still is not very beautiful, and it's still not into the pyramid that I want it into. So I just want you to notice how, like my flat sides that maybe I want flat, they're just puffing out a little bit. They're puffing out because, of course, there's air in there. And so the air is pressing out and it's just not letting me collapse the form. So I'm going to get this as close as I feel like I possibly can get it. And then I'm going to poke a hole in wherever I think the bottom is going to be, or wherever my audience won't see it, or my viewer, I should say. So I'm just going to take my needle tool and poke a hole. That's going to let all the air out. And now I'm going to be able paddle this a little more gently, because now that I don't have air beating back at me, I could actually collapse my form. I don't want to do that. Sometimes if I need the form to kind of move in a direction, I will take the paddle and almost try to move the clay. So right now I'm trying to get points a little bit. I'm not going to completely get the points, but I am trying to kind of move my clay to where I can deal with this area right here. I am only going to be able to get so far. In the attachments demo, I will show you how to make this into a perfect pyramid. For now, I really can only get it so far. I am going to try to whack this enough to open a seam. I think something's starting to happen right there because I really want to show you how to fix a seam. Broken seams are going to happen to at least 3 of you. It's going to happen. So let me see what I can do here. Here I have an open seam. If you have those superficial surface cracks, you're really okay. Something like that is okay. It's not going through, you can clean that up later. But if something is going all the way through, or it looks like it's about to break through, you've got to deal with it. And the way that you're going to want to do that, you're going to want to take your needle tool and you are going to wreck it. You're going to take that needle tool and press pretty much all the way through the seam. You're going to press around it. You basically want your clay to forget that there was ever a opening there, that anything ever happened there. So really make sure you get in there and tear it up. And then you're going to put a little bit of slip. And then I always like to take like a little wedge. It's kind of pointy on one side and round on the other. That you don't have to do that, but I kind of like, the more that I can get into that seam, the better. So I'm just going to take that and I'm going to press that right into the seam. Now, just like that nasty coil that I told you to leave, you are so much better off leaving this coil. If you don't leave the coil and you start coming in and cleaning it up right away, again, you're going to have that divot because this is a lot wetter than this is. So you want to let this firm up to the leather hard that the rest of the body is, and then you can start cleaning it up. And you're going to do the same thing where you push it in to make sure that that seam or that opening gets nice and compressed, nice and compacted, and then you can go through the rest of the cleaning steps. The other thing that you are not going to want to do is come in here right after you just finish this and start beating things again. If you do that, that's a really weak point and it hasn't set up, and it is, you may not see it now, but it could potentially reopen later, or it could reopen again now. So unfortunately, there are times where you are going to have to set this aside and let things firm up, put it away, and take your frustration out on it next time you get to with the paddle. Okay. So, still not looking great, but I'll talk to you about how to make this a little bit better later. The other thing that you can do is take your thumbs and start forming. You can take the palms of your hands and push in if there are areas that you want pushed in. So you can do all of these things while you're trying to form the body of whatever you are making. Next, you want to take a look at the cleanup video so that you know how to clean this up. You're going to want to do that before you start putting your attachments on, and then we will talk about how to put your attachments on and some of the things that you need to consider when you're doing that. Until then, happy pinching.